Moving on to questions that we have culled from the chat, starting with questions about social distancing and occupancy. Um, for in-person and hybrid courses, where will classes be held? Will courses with 20 to 30 students be in classrooms or lecture halls? If a regular size class is 25 to 40 students. Um, I think that this question is based on the charts that you put up before that show that the auditorium, for example, only fits 19. So the question is, how will those extra people be accommodated?
We have had some hybrid courses with a combination of in-person and remote learning. Certainly, if we have to maintain 6-foot spacing, I mean, clearly, you see, we're not going to be able to have, 40 people in a class, 30 people, or even maybe even, if you can put 20 people in Tanger, but we can't. I mean, how are we going to accommodate everybody? So, I mean, we're still awaiting guidance on what the situation is for fall. We don't really know yet, but if we're to maintain this, then yeah, things are going to have to be mostly remote. And then some things that have to be in person, we'll have to find spaces for them. And we're going to look at the ventilation, what spaces can accommodate, the requirements. And so those we're kind of doing on a case by case basis. So be patient with us as we work through. We've gotten a lot of requests from departments, and as we continue to, we have kind of a first pass at all of the teaching spaces. But some of them, for example, in Old Ingersoll, in Boylan, which do not have building mechanical ventilation, there's some spaces where the spacing can be reduced from 12 feet apart to 6 feet apart because we've added certain enhancements like UVC to disinfect the air, or adding an exhaust fan. Certain combinations where we can enhance the ventilation enough that we can go with 6-foot spacing. But of course, 6 foot also is not, it's not ideal. So we're looking at everything on a case by case basis. So that's,
Okay.
where we are now.
Thank you. So we have a question about a specific room. What did we decide, team, about those? Are we able to answer those? This is from Physical Education Kinesiology, is talking about that they require good ventilation and a clean room and equipment in West Quad 205. Or are we holding?
Yeah, I think we said the specific questions, with the specific departments and in those needs, instead of doing it, we have to look at the individual space instead of doing it kind of with everybody.
Facilities team is going around, that those specific rooms will be addressed. Another question about social distancing occupancy is, will not-for-profit organizations holding classes at Brooklyn College be notified of their requirements?
Okay. I just wanted to back up and acknowledge that when we talk about good ventilation and air quality, that people have had, we all experienced pre-COVID, maybe uncomfortable indoor air quality or indoor environmental conditions. We may have had environmental indoor air quality concerns, and yes, there is a relationship, but I do want to just say that that indoor air quality as it relates to COVID has to do with the percent of outdoor air and the filtration of that air. There are other factors that may feed into an occupant's experience of whether a space has a good indoor air quality or not, including generation of contaminants within the space. But I just want to acknowledge that. But I think it's an important thing to, if you have specific areas that you have concerns about, we are wanting to hear about those, but not at this forum.
Selena from the lab, the lab. Just wanted to say that I do understand where you're coming from in terms of the ventilation, the new ventilation necessity, and what previous ventilation conditions have happened around the campus. So I understand where you're coming from. However, I think that we've got to deal with these issues, basically.
Right, and we, where we have ventilation, where we are not meeting our standards for coronavirus safety, that results in reducing the number of people in the space. Just by the very fact that we reduce the number of people using a 6-foot safety margin, it automatically means that there's more fresh air per person. Fresh air, if you divvy it out by the occupants, we've reduced by necessity, but we've increased the percent and the actual volume of fresh air per person in the space. So just with that, we have better air quality, if you will, and it's safer from a COVID standpoint. But I hear what you're saying, Selena, and it's, we are going to take every space. We're looking at every space and making, coming up with solutions for each space.
Okay. So another question I'll just quickly answer. People are asking about where the masks are on campus, and the Brooklyn College masks are being handed out by student health and safety officers who visit on-campus classes. That's generally how they're handed out right now. Here is a social distancing question. Are there design recommendations for those of us who work at public service desks? How can we interact with students while still maintaining 6 feet?
That's a really good question. Duradashini, maybe you could take this one.
For student-facing offices, we are going to be installing plexiglass partitions, basically like a sneeze guard. So it doesn't mean that actually you should still be closer than 6 feet. It's some protection, but I understand it's like, how do you interact with everybody from 6 feet away? We will have the plexiglass in place, but yeah, it's well noted. So.
Right, and then the other thing is that in those spaces that have historically been high volume customer service or student interaction, there's also, what we've done and with the small volume that we have on campus now is we have visual markers, 6-foot markers to have people queue up to ensure that we don't have a congregation of students or other clientele in a small space. So that helps. but just for that interaction, that's where the barriers are helpful.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see. And next question. For students or instructors who have a break between classes, where on campus can they be so as not to have to leave campus and come back? Yeah, good question, especially with Everbridge.
Right. Well, we don't know how CUNY, what CUNY is going to be requiring or recommending in terms of health screening and restricted access, controlling access to the campus come fall, because we understand that those numbers are going to be a lot much greater, and that volume is going to potentially cause bottlenecks, which is antithetical to social distancing. So we don't want to see that. But just to get to your point, we're exploring all of our large spaces on campus, including the Georgian Room and Student Center, to see, and we're working with IT, which I think we're going to probably bring them in as another forum in the future, right, Alan? To discuss how Wi-Fi will work, because that's the limiting factor. But we know we need to provide for and support those students who are moving between an fully online class and a fully in-person class, so that they don't have to leave campus. I've gotten anecdotal from the students who work with me that that's been an issue, and it's the way it's been, and it's meant perhaps smaller numbers on campus. We're gonna address that for the fall, because we need to have those that ability and that capacity on campus. We just don't know the actual numbers, and part of it is, like I said, the Wi-Fi service in these spaces.
We have also a question. How likely is human subject research? How likely is it that human subject research can be resumed on campus over the summer?
That's a very specific question that I think needs, if you're involved in human research, human subjects research, there's CUNY guidelines on that, and we have an existing process for reviewing those applications and details of that research need. We're not turning away any application. So if you have a need or pending a grant that you're putting in, please bring that to the RRB through your chair and the provost.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, let's see. Will office occupants be informed on whether or not their space is CDC compliant regarding ventilation, and if improvements were made? I saw a lot of questions about that in the chat. So when you guys go in and do your test of the air quality, let's say, how are you going to post that information, or how will people find out about their offices?
This is something that we're continuing to explore. There is, the information that's fed into our decision making about maximum occupancy. So if the maximum occupancy is based on a 6-foot distance, then you know that it's met the standard. And it's not so much that a 12-foot safety margin doesn't meet the standard, it's just that it's safer to de-densify that space. I think that the only situation in which a space doesn't meet the CDC criteria would be a space that has no ventilation and is has more than one person in it. So we would not have we would not be allowing the use of that space for more than one person. So there are spaces that may be small, which may have no additional enhancement, but which can support a faculty person because it's a one-person office.
Next question is, oh yes, there will be a recording of this session made available, and I believe we're also trying to do it as a transcript in case you don't want to watch this. A question about mandatory testing. New York City Public Schools already do this. Will Brooklyn College or CUNY be doing that as the public schools do? Which might be in a category of us not being able to answer that question, I believe, because that has to come from CUNY Central to us, right? Yeah, Carrie is nodding her head.
Correct.
So the public school system, if you have public schools kids, you know that you sign a form and a group of them get tested regularly so they can try and catch positive cases, especially because kids often are symptomless, but they might have COVID. And so it would be up to CUNY Central, so that's a question that we would have to wait for their answer on.
I'll just say this, that our message, let's say that we don't have a mandatory testing or a testing regimen that's available to us on campus. The message has been, and it's become increasingly easy to do so, the message has been if you work outside of the home, get tested regularly. And New York City specifically said every month. I have been doing that. It has gotten much easier, but I also, when things were not, the lines were long, I did go to a health and hospital priority testing location, and I was, along with health and hospital employees, I was able to get to the front of the line, if you will. So it's available to everyone, and it's efficient. So take advantage of it, and free.
Thank you. So
I see someone said something about Brooklyn College being a vaccination site.
yes,
We've done walkthroughs with, and the president has done walkthroughs with various bodies to assess whether our site is a good candidate. And so we're not opposed to it, for sure. Medgar Evers is just down the street. So that's, I don't know if we'll be considered, but we're open to it.
and I see to add that Marcus has also put in the chat sort of updated information on priority testing if you want to get a test at any point, which is appreciated. Somebody asked the question, would testing still be recommended after receiving the vaccine? I would say that you should look at the CDC guidelines on that. And I believe, having checked that sort of recently myself, that they say, yes, it's still good to test. But I checked the CDC. Okay, we also have a question. How will we keep track of everyone on campus when we have a large number of in-person courses? Our current system does not seem like it'll work very well when we scale up. And I do think, Carrie, that you have indicated that Everbridge might not scale up. So I guess maybe do we have plans or ideas about, as we get more people on campus, what we will do yet?
I would just be postulating. It does seem like scaling up just the sheer number and the gating, the fact that we're not fully open, gates wide open. And we don't have a card reading system, makes for a challenge. I don't know.
Okay. Here's a different sort of question, but similar maybe to the people who work at desks that face students. What about people who work in desks where it's actually shared with somebody else or they're right next to each other? Are there going to be partitions there? Are we going to be reorganizing office spaces? Or are those being, looked at?
Darshini, could you take that one on? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we've started with the instructional spaces, and kind of the next category of spaces we're looking at is the shared offices, because we know that's a concern. So depending on the spacing in the offices, the ventilation in the offices, and also depending on CUNY's remote work policy, which we don't know anything about yet. It's possible that people may need to come in on alternate days. We don't quite have enough information, but also we're sort of gathering all the information to do the space analysis for all of the shared office spaces. So we'll have that pretty soon. And as Carrie's saying, we're still figuring out what's the best way to communicate all of this information to everyone. And we haven't figured that out yet. So we'll get back to you on it, but we're working on it.
Yeah. I think we got a lot of questions about ventilation, which I think were pretty much all covered in Carrie's and Joe's discussion of ventilation, except maybe how does a heater affect air filtration? Or is that sort of you're using all the same formulas regardless of whether the heat is on?
Joe.
Yeah, a localized heater will not affect the ventilation issue. It's actually not a recommended policy for on campus to be using an outside heater. If you have a heater and your space is having a problem, I would prefer you to call into 5885 and we'll repair it.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. I think we also added.
Jen, I'm going to add on to Joe's response because it does make me think about inclement weather and use of windows. Use of windows and opening windows is going to be a key piece to densifying our campus, particularly in those locations where we have, it'll be a necessity in those locations where it's primarily natural ventilation or blended ventilation, such as Whitehead. But as we know and have experienced in really cold months, we're going to have some way of stewarding those window opening and closings to make sure that we are protecting our building infrastructure against deep freezes and pipe breaks and
rain,
other things. Rain. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's going to require some new processes to ensure that we can maximize our use of opening windows.
I think we're going to be able to squeeze in maybe one or two more questions before we wrap up. This is one that is about when people have been fully vaccinated, is the Everbridge app going to sort of reflect that? So
we're awaiting CUNY revisions that would incorporate vaccination status into everything from quarantine requirements to post-travel quarantine. And, you know, as of now, we know that CDC is still recommending that even if you're vaccinated, that you minimize your indoor close contact and continue to stay masked with people who are not vaccinated. So you know, workplaces have. I would suspect that a very small percentage of workplaces are trying to you know, deal with that nuance of you know, until we have a larger, higher percentage of vaccinated status, or if we're able to know your vaccination status. Right now, we are not even asking what your status is, and we don't have a method for collecting that information.
The very last question, it's about big public spaces like the library. How will the numbers in spaces be tracked there? Because it's not like going to a specific room, right? You move when you're in the library. You know, if you're looking for books in 1985.
Well, that we're going to do some. We haven't really had our planning meeting with the library yet, so we're going to look to them for their ideas and hear about what other libraries are doing. You know, all of you are subject matter experts in your own field, and I'm sure that there's a lot of chats and blogs and whatever that where people are sharing ideas on how to safely come back and reopen, and in some cases they've been open. We're happy to have you come to the table with ideas and a plan. Tell us what you want to do and what you think will work. That is a challenge. Is, you know, can we have somebody at the door counting the numbers? Probably not. Will we be doing it more by just marking off those and removing those furnitures that don't allow for social distancing? Probably. So limiting through design and configuration.
Okay, thank you. So I think because we're almost at 3:30, we have to wrap up. I want to just answer a few things. One is that our committee is going to be meeting again soon. Somebody asked in early May. I don't have the exact date. But we will be, I think, talking about the next time we do a public thing like this, because we're not planning on this being the last one, right, Alan?